Welcome back to Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. I'm your instructor, Professor Leitner, and today we're going to be talking about some of the earliest anthropological theories of religion. This is the first of two parts. We'll start the first part in this module and continue the second part in the next module. This part will be focusing largely on anthropological theories from the early days of the social sciences, from about the mid 19th century, and then going on up until about the mid to late mid 20th century. Today, we're going to be taking a look at two main phases in the early theoretical developments in the anthropology of religion. We'll start by looking at the early attempts at studying the origins of religion and where religious and cultural change come from. Then we'll switch gears and talk about the big three, the founders of the social sciences in a sense. Marx, Weber, and Durkheim are kind of considered the intellectual, theoretical fathers of not just anthropology, but of sociology as well. So we'll take a look at their influences on the study of religion in anthropology. We'll start off today by talking about cultural diffusionism. This was a theory from about the mid 19th century up through the late 19th, early 20th century, which held that all cultural change came about through contact with other, oftentimes superior, quote unquote, civilizations. The idea that certain kinds of civilization could change themselves, could innovate new ways of doing things, was unfortunately not seen as reasonable by many diffusionists. On the British side, we had some pretty extreme versions of this theory, starting with George Eliot Smith and W.G. Perry. They believed that all civilizations of any advancement originated from ancient Egypt through dispersal and trade. In Germany, on the other hand, Fritz Graebner and Wilhelm Schmidt developed Kulturkreise, the idea of culture circles. In this idea, they believed that all cultures developed and evolved through certain stages from simple to complex. And any similarities between nearby cultures was undoubtedly due to shared ancestry, not to convergent innovations. This was a big influence on many early American anthropologists as well. Now, there are some pros to this. It certainly placed an emphasis on the past contact and trade between cultures and the influence cultures can have on one another. The cons, it was almost entirely speculative and not supported by any good fieldwork. It was ethnocentric, it was Eurocentric, and it was racist. And also completely ignored the possibility of convergent innovations and any kind of independent agency for certain kinds of cultures. So, not really the best way to investigate the origins. At the same time, there was another school of thought that we'll call unilineal evolution. I'm calling it unilineal to distinguish it from Darwinian evolution. Although they were certainly inspired by Darwin's work, if you look at their models, they are unilineal. That is, civilizations can develop in one direction through specific stages. Darwinian evolution doesn't really work that way. Darwinian evolution creates trees, like family trees. Now, the unilineal evolutionists focused on explaining the origins and development of religious behavior, but not its meaning or function. As I mentioned, they were misinterpreting Darwin largely and believed that all societies pass through the same predictable phases. They went from simple to more complex. Generally speaking, neither this nor diffusionism is taken very seriously these days. A typical model of unilineal evolution would have looked something like this. Starting with the idea of animatism, this was developed by R. Merritt. He considered it a kind of pre-animism, a belief in universal energy or force, not individualized souls or spirits. E.B. Tyler and others speculated that perhaps the next step is animism, belief that all things have souls, spirits, and intentionality, that they are motivated by, that they are moved by anima, which is ancient Greek for the soul or the spirit or breath. Now, most unilineal evolutionists then sort of made room for what they call polytheism, that is, belief in many gods. Poly meaning many, theism meaning belief in God. Belief in multiple gods would be represented by civilizations like ancient Rome and the Canaanite religions in the historical past, or in the present by religions like Hinduism. Then they believed societies would pass through a monotheistic phase where they believe in only one God. And of course, this would be reflected in the major monotheistic religions of today, particularly Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Finally, many of the unilineal evolutionists believed that the ultimate final phase would be belief in science and rationality, where people would have no need for belief in the so-called supernatural. Of course, we now know that these hierarchies and phases of religious belief don't actually work. There is no relationship between how quote-unquote advanced a society is and how it structures its belief in the supernatural. In the late 19th and early 20th century, a response to this kind of thinking came from Franz Boas. He was half Jewish, born in Germany, and moved to the United States. He studied both geography and eventually sort of was the father of American anthropology. He developed this idea called historical particularism. In historical particularism, he acknowledged that culture, contact, and innovation are both factors that societies encounter, and that every culture has been shaped by historical forces and processes unique to that culture, not by some universal law or universal series of phases that they have to pass through. The effect of this is it immediately decentered Eurocentric notions of historical development, particularly in the societies like many of the Native American tribes that he was studying. It also emphasized the importance of historical and environmental context to the study of culture. It was underpinned by his notion of cultural relativism, which we talked about in a previous video, where you have to take what people believe and how they accept the world into consideration before you make any judgments about them. There was an emphasis on extended fieldwork as the only way to get into this space of understanding other cultures, and it also warned that comparisons of cultures could often be misleading because it was too easy to ignore the context that those cultures developed in. Anthropologists today are still interested in the origins of religion. However, we approach it a little bit differently than any of these past theories did. Modern anthropologists tend to not believe in unilineal or ethnocentric models. Instead, they focus on the correlation of factors like the development of certain economic, political, and subsistence systems with the development of religion. One good example of this is the study of Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe are a set of ruins in modern-day Turkey that date to around 11,000 years ago. What's significant about these is that they are perhaps the oldest permanent structures we have made by human beings, possibly the oldest permanent settlements, and very likely a site of religious festivals, so therefore one of the first places where we might see activities of what we consider organized religion. These festivals might also have pushed the domestication of local grapes for wine based on genetic testing of residue in some of the wine vats that were found there. And so it's very possible that the relationship between having large populations come together for festivals and the need to provision for them may have been an impetus for actually developing agriculture. Now, another way that anthropologists are studying religion today is by looking at some of the biological origins of it. Some anthropologists have hypothesized that humans may have developed what's called a hyperactive agency detection mechanism. That is, we have a tendency to overestimate the agency of things that happen around us. In other words, if you hear the wind rustling the trees, then maybe, just maybe, it's just the wind. But that one time in 10 where it's actually a lion would matter. And so being likely to overestimate the idea that there is something causing that sound is going to be an adaptive advantage, and you will be more likely to sort of pass this on to your offspring. Now, proponents of this hyperactive agency detection theory suggest that this would then be a sort of bridge to then ascribing intentionality to the wind in the form of spirits or gods or other such intentional forces, things that have agency, and that this might be the origins of religious behavior. Now we're going to leave behind this sort of search for origins and focus on what the big three were doing, Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Marx is, of course, most famous for his work on socialism and communism and on his theories of dialectical materialism. Religion was a part of that. He saw religion as an integral part of human society, but that with the advent of capitalism, religion takes on a different role. The way he sees it, capitalism causes people suffering. Religion's purpose is to ease that suffering. But at the same time, in a capitalist society, it has a tendency to obscure the origins of suffering in capitalism so that we don't recognize the exploitation that causes suffering. Simultaneously, then, it makes participation in self-exploitation a virtue and therefore encourages more participation in that exploitation. He's referred to religion as the opium of the masses. In this sense, he was not talking about it being addictive or pernicious per se, but rather saying that it played the same role that opium did at the time in medicine, which was to soothe and to ease pain. He saw religion's role as dealing with crisis and misfortune, but that this created what he called the false consciousness, this ability to recognize one was suffering, but not able to see the origins of that suffering in exploitation. And his focus on material relations in political, economic, and religious phenomena really shaped a lot of modern day takes on how religion operates. Next on our list is Durkheim. Durkheim was the father of a set of theories called functionalism. In functionalism, sociologists and anthropologists saw society as an organism, and like an organism, it has separate parts that all contribute to the whole. Societal institutions would be the organs in the organism that keep it together. He saw religion as one of these organs, and he said that it creates a collective consciousness. Societal sanctions, he felt, were insufficient to hold society together on their own, and in that case, religion steps in to create a collective identity and pressure to contain selfishness and to promote cooperation. Through rituals and symbols, people reconnect with the values of the religion and of society and reconnect with one another. Now, another proponent of functionalism was the anthropologist Malinowski. Malinowski is best known as the father of long-term field work. He did work in the Trobriand Islands for many, many years, and that became the norm in anthropology as a result. But his main theoretical focus was functionalism. Like Durkheim, he saw that social institutions were there to meet basic human needs. For him, religion and magic broadly establish a sense of control and ease anxiety in the face of the unpredictability of nature. But unlike Durkheim, Malinowski stressed religion's role in times of crisis as its sort of most important cohesive function. Malinowski was also important in recognizing that this meant that there was an inherent rationality in supposedly quote unquote irrational people. What he called pre-literate people have practical knowledge and mastery of their environment, according to him, and that magic is usually only reserved for places where there is a great deal of uncertainty and risk. Malinowski's approach has been criticized, and the functionalists in general have been criticized for their overemphasis on social cohesion and ignoring religion's disruptive aspects as well. Now we come to Weber. Weber's big innovation is the notion that we exist in webs of meaning. That is, that meaning is at the center of cultural and social behavior. All people are caught in and creating interconnected webs of symbols and signs. And religion is intertwined with the symbols and signs of other cultural institutions. In his work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, he makes a connection between religious and economic and political forms. He views ascetic Protestantism as having redefined the connection between work and piety historically. And as a result, certain notions, like Calvinist notions of predestination, which held that material wealth could actually be an indicator of heavenly salvation, would have a natural advantage in capitalist systems. He didn't see Protestantism as having caused capitalism, but rather that it had what he called an elective affinity with it. In other words, they were serving many of the same purposes. They fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. A later anthropologist, Clifford Geertz, in the 1970s and 80s, developed a set of theories based partly on Weber's notion of webs of meaning that he called interpretive anthropology or interpretivism. Geertz sees religion as composed of interrelated symbols and that symbols have specific purposes. Symbols are interrelated, and that's best seen in this quote here that he uses. Some of the terminology in the quote is probably not very current. It is from 1973, so forgive that if you will. But the quote goes, "There is an Indian story, at least I heard it as an Indian story, about an Englishman who, having been told that the world rested on a platform which rested on the back of an elephant, which rested in turn on the back of a turtle, asked, perhaps he was an ethnographer, it is the way they behave, what did the turtle rest on? Another turtle. And that turtle? Ah, Sahib. After that, it is turtles all the way down." For Geertz, it's symbols all the way down. That symbols are interconnected in this sort of endless cycle that requires what he called thick description to actually pull apart and understand. And that the analysis of a culture's systems of meaning was how we get at understanding the experience of people in that culture. It also meant that our understanding will always be incomplete. We will be trying to approach an understanding that we can never fully get to. Connecting social structures to psychological processes is a lot of what these symbols are doing. And that is where religion became a big focus for him. We can see that in his own definition of religion. For Geertz, a religion is a system of symbols which act to establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations in men and women, by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. That's a mouthful, so let's go through this one at a time. First of all, Geertz is telling us that religion is composed of a system of symbols. Not just that it's composed, that it is the system of symbols. That's very important. Symbols are the thing that give meaning, and they draw meaning from one another. What do these symbols do? They establish powerful, pervasive, and long-lasting moods and motivations. In other words, they serve to create particular psychological and motivational states within people. It creates these moods and motivations by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence. This is a worldview, a cosmology. It is how you see the world, because this is what you are told the world is. It then gives these conceptions an aura of factuality. So it's not just this is what you think the world is, this is a fact. Your worldview is the way you see the world, and it is the world. Finally, the purpose of that factuality, that aura of factuality, is so that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. It's important that they seem realistic because one of the things religion does is to get you to do things with others, to get things done. It's a motivator and a mood, remember. Now, all of these theorists have had some impact on anthropology today. So it's important sort of that we understand them and that we learn about them. But I just want to say some final thoughts. The earliest anthropologists were obsessed with questions of the origins of religion and religious forms, but their theories were largely ethnocentric, Eurocentric, and highly speculative. Historical particularism solves some of these problems, but not all of them. And the social sciences big three, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, were less interested in the origins of religion and more interested in what religion does and how it is connected to other cultural phenomena. Although few anthropologists today would describe themselves as purely Marxist, functionalist, interpretivist, whatever, all of these theorists have had long-lasting influences, some of which we'll take a look at in the next module. Until then, have a great week, and I'll see you soon.